Mafia boss goes on a blind date with the waitress as a bet and is shocked when. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. At the heart of the city, inside an upscale restaurant known for its opulence and sophistication, a peculiar challenge had been set in motion. The lights above gleamed like diamonds, casting a golden hue over the tables where business tycoons and high-profile celebrities dined. Amidst the fine china and crystal glasses, a powerful man sat in the back corner, his dark eyes scanning the room with the intensity of a predator. Dominic Castellano, a mafia boss whose name alone could send chills down the spine of anyone who dared utter it, sat motionless at his table. His reputation for ruthlessness was only rivaled by his ability to manipulate those around him with the slightest of gestures. His sharp jawline, hidden under a perfectly groomed beard, gave him an air of coldness, while his tailored suit made him look every bit the part of a dangerous man with too much power. But tonight, something different hung in the air. A bet had been made. Dominic's trusted associate, Marco, had challenged him. I bet you can't go on a blind date with a waitress. If you do, I'll call it even for the last favor you owe me. The words echoed in Dominic's mind as he sat there, pondering. It was a strange request, and it was made with the kind of tone that Dominic could never refuse. A challenge was a challenge, after all, and when Marco bet something, there was always more at stake than just a simple favor. The idea of sitting across from an ordinary woman, someone who had no idea who he really was, intrigued him. He'd been surrounded by power, wealth, and manipulation for so long that the thought of something simple and real, like a genuine dinner conversation with a woman, felt almost foreign. But that was precisely why he agreed. He'd take the bet and show Marco that nothing, absolutely nothing, was too much of a challenge for him. Enter Lily. She was standing by the bar when Dominic walked in. The restaurant was bustling with energy as waiters and waitresses moved swiftly between tables, but Lily, with her kind eyes and effortless grace, caught his attention immediately. She wasn't the usual type of woman Dominic was used to, a woman polished by status or power. She was different, more grounded, more real. Her dark hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and her uniform, though standard, fit her perfectly, showcasing a figure that spoke of hard work and dedication. What really struck Dominic, however, was the way she carried herself. There was no fear in her eyes when she looked at him, no nervousness, just a quiet confidence. It was refreshing. She approached him with a casual ease, asking if he would like to start with a drink. Her voice was soft but steady, and for a brief moment, Dominic forgot who he was. He wasn't the mafia boss who ruled the city with an iron fist. He was just a man, sitting at a table with a woman who had no idea of the depths of his world. As they spoke, Dominic realized something strange. He was intrigued by her. Lily had no idea of the dangerous life he led, nor did she seem to care. She spoke of her job, of her dreams of one day owning a small cafe, of simple things that made her smile. Dominic found himself listening intently, his usual sharp demeanor softening with every word she said. The night stretched on, and the chemistry between them grew stronger with each passing minute. But as the evening wore on, something unexpected happened. Lily, who had been calm and composed the entire time, suddenly faltered when Dominic made a joke about his worldly life. For the first time, he saw the hint of fear in her eyes. But it wasn't fear of him, not really. It was fear of the unknown, of what it might mean to be involved with someone like him. Dominic could see that she was beginning to understand who he really was, and it made him uncomfortable. He had been careful, hiding the true nature of his life from her, but the connection they had built felt too real to be ignored. And, just as quickly as it had started, the evening took a turn. Dominic knew he had to make a choice. Let her walk away and keep his world of danger and power intact, or open up to her, risking it all for something that felt more genuine than anything he had known in years. The choice was harder than he had expected. As the evening progressed, Dominic found himself unable to focus on anything but Lily. The restaurant buzzed with conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the faint hum of a live jazz band in the background. But to Dominic, the world had quieted down. All that mattered now was the woman across from him, who seemed so far removed from the dangerous world he inhabited. She smiled, and Dominic couldn't help but feel an unfamiliar warmth stir within him. Her laugh, light and genuine, made him forget the weight of his title, the fear that came with his reputation, and for the first time in a long while, he simply felt human. He found himself leaning in, listening more intently than he ever had before. She was talking about her childhood, about her dreams of opening a small cafe, of escaping the world of waitressing and carving out a future that was hers, where she didn't have to be invisible to the powerful people around her. Dominic's heart tightened at the thought. It was a simple dream, one that most people would never think twice about, but it was real to her. He saw the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of it, and it made him want to protect that light. It made him want to give her more than just a night of pretending. For the first time, Dominic questioned everything. Should he leave her in her world, where things were simpler, safer? Or should he let her see the truth of who he was, knowing it would change everything? He quickly dismissed the thought. His world had no place for someone like her. He couldn't let anyone get too close, not even someone as beautiful, kind, and real as Lily. The night wore on, and Dominic found himself wanting to keep her talking, to keep this feeling alive. He had been in control of his life for so long, making decisions that impacted the lives of so many. But with Lily, he felt like he had no control. She was an enigma, the kind of woman who didn't fit into his world of power plays, danger, and manipulation. He was used to women who were after his wealth or status, women who had been trained to please, to flatter, to obey. But Lily wasn't like that. She was different, and that difference intrigued him more than anything ever had. But as the night wore on, the conversation took a sudden turn. The wine flowed a little too freely, and Lily began to share more about herself than Dominic had expected. She told him about the struggles of growing up in a small town, the sacrifices her family had made, and how she had ended up in New York, working in a job she didn't love, but did because it paid the bills. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't what she wanted, but it was what she had to do. And as she spoke, Dominic felt a stirring in his chest, something he couldn't ignore. He had spent his life building an empire, using fear and manipulation to get what he wanted, but Lily, she wasn't afraid of him. She didn't seem to care who he was. She just wanted to talk. She wanted to be seen for who she truly was, not for the power or money that came with being in his orbit. It was a feeling he had never known, and he realized, for the first time in years, that it felt good. But then, as the night stretched on, something shifted. Lily's demeanor changed, and Dominic saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She had been so open, so genuine, but now she seemed guarded. Her smile was still there, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She had picked up on something. Dominic had been careful, but there were moments when his guard had slipped, moments when his true nature had shown through. And she had noticed. He could tell. It wasn't the way she looked at him, but the way she suddenly seemed distant, the way she had retreated into herself. Dominic cursed under his breath. He had been so close to something real, so close to breaking through his walls, but now he was unsure if she would ever look at him the same way again. She excused herself to the bathroom, leaving Dominic alone at the table. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the empty space across from him. The music seemed to fade away, and the bustling noise of the restaurant became a dull hum in the background. He didn't know what he had expected from this night, but it certainly wasn't this. He had come here to prove a point, to win a bet, to show Marco that he could do something as trivial as a blind date with a waitress. But what he hadn't expected was to feel this way. He had never cared about anyone outside his world of crime and power. But Lily was different. She was breaking through the walls he had so carefully built, and he didn't know how to stop it. When she returned, her eyes were filled with uncertainty. She didn't sit down immediately. Instead, she lingered by the doorway, her back slightly turned, as if she was giving herself a moment to decide what to do next. Dominic knew she was about to ask the question he had been dreading all night. And sure enough, she did. "Who are you, really?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's heart sank. It was the question he had feared the most, the question that would shatter the illusion he had so carefully constructed. The moment of truth had arrived. Lily's question hung in the air, and Dominic felt the weight of it pressing down on him. "Who are you, really?" Her voice was soft, but it sliced through the tension in the room like a knife. For a moment, he could hardly breathe. The easy charm he had relied on all his life, the one that had helped him control every room he entered, seemed to vanish in an instant. He wasn't used to being vulnerable, not even a little. His world was about power, manipulation, and fear. But with Lily, things were different. The walls he had built around himself, the ones he thought were unbreakable, were starting to crumble. And it scared him. He wanted to lie, to tell her it was just a misunderstanding, that she didn't need to know anything more. But something inside him, something he couldn't control, made him hesitate. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since they had sat down. The way her eyes searched his, waiting for an answer, made him feel like he was standing naked in front of her. There was no hiding, no pretending. Dominic could see that now. He had two choices, lie, or tell her the truth. But the truth was dangerous, so dangerous that it could ruin everything. And yet, as he sat there, his mind racing with the implications, he found himself leaning toward honesty. "I'm Dominic Castellano," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "And yes, I'm the man you think I am." He watched her carefully, looking for any sign of shock, fear, or revulsion. But Lily only blinked, her face still calm, still composed. The silence between them stretched out, heavy with unspoken words. Dominic knew she was processing everything. He could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to piece together the man sitting across from her with the life she had just learned about. It must have been hard for her to reconcile the kind, gentle man who had shared his dinner with her with the Mafia boss he had just revealed himself to be. He wasn't the kind of man women dreamed about. He was the kind of man who made people fear him, who could take everything away with a single word. But Lily didn't seem afraid. Not yet. She sat there, still looking at him, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady, though he could sense the hesitation in her words. "You really are a Mafia boss, then?" It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact. And that's when Dominic realized that Lily wasn't afraid. She wasn't repulsed, either. She was just confused. "Yes," he said simply, his eyes locking with hers. "I've built an empire on fear and power. And it's not just a name. It's my life. But that doesn't mean I'm who you think I am." She didn't respond right away, and Dominic could see her trying to make sense of everything. She was struggling, he could tell. She had come here tonight expecting a simple date, a light-hearted evening, and now, she was learning that the man sitting across from her was far more dangerous than she could have imagined. He saw the doubt in her eyes, the confusion. He saw the way her breath caught slightly, as if she was trying to digest the truth of his words. And for the first time, Dominic felt like he was losing control. This wasn't the plan. He hadn't expected to tell her the truth, hadn't expected this moment to come at all. But now that it had, he wasn't sure how to handle it. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he said, his voice softer now, as if he were speaking more to himself than to her. "I never meant for you to be dragged into my world. I didn't want you to see the side of me that I keep hidden from everyone else." Lily sat back in her chair, her eyes never leaving his. She was silent for a moment, her gaze unwavering, and Dominic could feel her assessing him, reading him in a way that no one else ever had. For a moment, he thought she might get up, leave, and never look back. But she didn't. Instead, she did something that surprised him even more. She smiled. It was small at first, just a faint curve of her lips, but it was enough to make his heart skip a beat. "You're not what I expected," she said softly. "But I guess I'm not either, huh?" Dominic didn't know how to respond to that. He had expected her to be afraid, to run away from him, but instead, she was calm. She wasn't judging him, at least not yet. She wasn't afraid, either. It was strange. Dominic wasn't used to people not being afraid of him. But with Lily, he felt like he could breathe. He felt like he didn't have to hide who he was anymore. And that scared him even more. He was used to people fearing him, respecting him, or even loving him for the wrong reasons. But Lily, she wasn't any of those things. She was different. And somehow, that made everything feel more real. "I didn't want to lie to you," Dominic said, his voice low, his words almost a confession. "I wanted this night to be real, even if everything around it is a lie." Lily's smile softened, and she leaned forward slightly. "I think we've both been pretending tonight," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we need a little pretending to get through the truth." Dominic stared at her, surprised by her insight. She was right, of course. He had been pretending. He had been pretending to be someone he wasn't, just like she had been pretending. But now, the truth was out in the open, and he wasn't sure where to go from here. But as he looked at Lily, her calm expression, her quiet strength, he realized something. Maybe, for once in his life, he didn't need to control everything. Maybe, just maybe, he could let go. Lily sat back in her chair, her hands resting on the table in front of her as she looked at Dominic. The air between them had shifted, no longer tense or awkward, but heavy with the weight of understanding. They had crossed a line, both of them. The game they had been playing, the pretense, had dissolved, and what was left now was the truth, raw and unfiltered. Dominic had been prepared for fear, for her shock and disgust, but instead, she was calm. Too calm. And that, in its own way, unsettled him more than anything else. "I never expected you to be this honest," Lily said softly, her voice steady. "I didn't think I'd be sitting here with you, knowing everything." Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly, unsure if he should feel relieved or anxious. He had confessed his darkest secret, laid himself bare in front of her, and she had simply accepted it. He had prepared for this moment to be his undoing, but Lily's reaction was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "I'm not sure what you want from me," Dominic admitted, his voice low. "I don't even know what I want from this." He gestured between them, the meaning clear without needing to be said. "This night, this whole thing, it's not what I imagined." Lily leaned forward, her eyes searching his. "What did you imagine?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. Dominic hesitated. The truth was, he hadn't imagined anything. Not really. His life had been about control, about winning, about staying one step ahead of everyone. But sitting here with her, in the quiet of this restaurant, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Vulnerability. It was a strange feeling, and he hated it. But at the same time, there was something undeniably compelling about it. "I thought I could just show up, play my part, and leave," he said slowly. "That's how it's always been. I never had to deal with the consequences." But now, he trailed off, unsure how to finish the thought. He couldn't put it into words, not without making it sound like he was giving up something he wasn't ready to let go of. "But now it's not just a game," Lily finished for him, her voice a mix of understanding and something else, maybe pity, maybe something more. She wasn't judging him, not yet anyway, but he could see it in her eyes. The realization was dawning on her that this wasn't just about a blind date anymore. It wasn't about a bet or a challenge. It was about them, about the possibility of something real. "I'm not asking for you to change, Dominic," she said after a beat. "I'm just asking you to be honest with me, and maybe with yourself." Dominic swallowed hard. Her words cut deeper than he expected. He had spent his entire life lying to himself, convincing himself that he didn't need anything or anyone. But here, in this moment, with Lily sitting across from him, he felt like the walls he had spent so long building were crumbling, and he didn't know how to stop it. "I don't know if I can do that," he admitted, his voice rough. Lily didn't say anything for a moment, just sat there, watching him with those calm, steady eyes. She wasn't rushing him. She wasn't pushing him to be anything he wasn't ready to be. And that, in its own way, was more than he could handle. "You don't have to," she said finally. "But you should know that I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. But I need you to be real with me, Dominic. I need to know who you are." He looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time. Her eyes were so open, so honest, and it made him feel exposed. It made him want to run. But instead, he stayed there, sitting across from her, and he realized something. For the first time in a long time, he wanted to stay. The door to his world, the world he had so carefully protected, was opening, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to step through it. But something in Lily's words, something in her presence, made him think that maybe, just maybe, it was time to try. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice quiet. Lily gave him a soft smile, one that didn't reach for the edges of the table, but settled between them like a quiet promise. "We see where this goes," she said simply. "And if you're ready to be honest with me, we'll figure it out together. No expectations. Just two people, figuring it out." Dominic felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was fleeting, fragile, but it was there. And for the first time, he let himself feel it. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he was ready for the consequences of his actions, or the fallout from his past. But he knew one thing. He couldn't walk away from this. Not now. Not with Lily sitting across from him, her honesty a beacon in the storm of his life. For once, Dominic Castellano didn't want to be in control. The next few days were a blur for Dominic. He couldn't shake the feeling of being exposed. He had always been in control of his world, a man whose power was built on fear, respect, and manipulation. But with Lily, everything felt different. She didn't fear him, and for reasons he couldn't quite understand, that unsettled him. He had spent years hiding behind a facade, using his reputation and power to keep everyone at a distance. But Lily, she saw through it all. She wasn't like the women he was used to. She didn't look at him like a mafia boss, didn't see him as a danger or a weapon. She simply saw him, Dominic. And for some reason, that was terrifying. Yet, it was also liberating in a way he hadn't expected. The past few days had been a whirlwind of quiet moments, shared glances, and conversations that stretched into the night. She hadn't run, hadn't recoiled from his world. Instead, she listened, asking questions, showing an interest in him that he wasn't used to. There was no pretense with her, no ulterior motive. She didn't want anything from him. But he found himself wanting to be around her, wanting to prove to her that he was more than the man he had let everyone believe. It was late one evening when Dominic received a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was familiar, but it sent a chill down his spine nonetheless. "We need to talk. It's about Lily." Dominic's heart skipped a beat. He had been trying to protect her from his world, from the dangers that came with knowing someone like him. But the more he tried to keep her out, the more he realized that it wasn't just his world that was dangerous, it was hers too. She didn't know it yet, but she had already been drawn into something far darker than she could ever have imagined. The truth was, no one got close to Dominic Castellano without paying a price. It didn't matter how innocent or kind they seemed. His world had a way of pulling everyone in, whether they wanted it or not. And now, it was pulling Lily in. He quickly ended the call and looked out over the city from his office window. The skyline stretched out before him, a sea of lights and shadows. But in the midst of all the power and wealth, there was a feeling of unease that he couldn't ignore. He had made a promise to himself long ago never to let anyone get too close. But Lily had changed that. She had become a part of his world in a way that no one else ever had, and that terrified him. He had been trying to keep her safe, but he realized now that keeping her safe meant keeping her away from everything he had built. And that, in itself, was impossible. He couldn't protect her from everything, not without risking everything he had worked for. He couldn't protect her from himself. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping absently on the armrest. He thought about the conversations they had shared, the way she had looked at him with those eyes that saw beyond the surface, beyond the mafia boss he had worked so hard to become. She had seen him as a person, not as a monster. And that, in itself, was something he wasn't sure he could handle. He wasn't used to being seen that way. The thought of her being in danger because of him made his stomach turn. And yet, he knew that he couldn't walk away from her. He had already let her in, and now, there was no turning back. He stood up abruptly, his mind racing. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit here and let things happen to her. He had to take control. He had to protect her, even if it meant putting everything else on the line. He walked toward the door, his mind made up. But before he could step out into the hallway, the phone rang again. This time, it was Marco. "Boss, you need to hear this." Marco's voice was grim, the urgency in his tone unmistakable. Dominic's heart clenched. He knew that whatever Marco had to say, it wasn't good. "What's going on?" Dominic asked, his voice cold. "It's about Lily," Marco replied. "We've got a problem." Dominic felt his pulse quicken. His instincts kicked in, a sense of danger sweeping over him. "What kind of problem?" he demanded. Marco's silence was the only answer he needed. He turned on his heel, his mind already working through the possibilities. There were so many enemies out there, so many threats to his world. But this was different. Lily wasn't part of his world, and yet somehow, she had become its most vulnerable point. Dominic couldn't let anything happen to her. Not now. Not after everything they had shared. He grabbed his coat and stormed out of his office, his mind focused solely on one thing. Lily. He didn't know what had happened, but he knew that whatever it was, he wouldn't let it stand. He would protect her, no matter the cost. As he stepped into the elevator, he felt a weight settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about power anymore. It wasn't about control or domination. This was personal. And for the first time in years, Dominic Castellano didn't care about being in control. All he cared about was keeping her safe. Dominic's mind raced as he rushed through the streets, the cold air biting at his skin. He couldn't shake the image of Lily out of his head, her calm face, the way she had looked at him when he confessed the truth. He hadn't expected her to react like that, not in a million years. Most people would have run the moment they knew who he really was. But not Lily. She had stayed, she had listened, and now he was responsible for keeping her safe. He gritted his teeth as he thought about the phone call with Marco. Whatever had happened, it was bad. He knew that much. And the fact that it involved Lily only made it worse. His world, the one he had so carefully built, was dangerous. He had never allowed anyone to get too close to the heart of it. But now Lily was there. She had seen the real him, the man behind the Mafia boss, and she had chosen to stay. Dominic couldn't lose that. Not now. Not after everything. As he entered his penthouse, his security detail was already there, waiting for him. Marco stood at the center of the room, his face tense, his eyes grim. "Boss," Marco said, nodding in acknowledgement. "It's worse than we thought." Dominic's stomach tightened. "What happened?" Marco hesitated for a moment, then spoke quickly. "We've been getting intel. Someone has been watching her. Watching Lily. And from what we've gathered, they're not just interested in her. They want to use her to get to you." Dominic's heart skipped a beat. He had always known that his enemies were watching, always keeping tabs on him. But he had never expected them to go after someone close to him. Someone like Lily. "Who are we dealing with?" Dominic demanded, his voice cold and controlled. Marco didn't answer immediately, and when he did, his voice was low. "The Volkov family." Dominic's blood ran cold. The Volkovs. They were one of the most powerful families in the city, known for their ruthlessness, their willingness to do whatever it took to gain control. They were the last people he wanted to be involved with, and now they had crossed a line. They were after Lily. Dominic felt the familiar fire of anger build inside him. No one threatened the people he cared about. No one. "We need to act fast," Dominic said, his voice steady but filled with authority. "Get everyone in position. I don't care if we have to burn the whole city down." "They're not touching her." Marco nodded, a look of determination in his eyes. "Understood, boss. We'll take care of it." As Marco and the rest of the security team moved out, Dominic stood there, his mind racing. He had spent his entire life building an empire, protecting it from the threats that lurked in the shadows. But this time, it wasn't just his empire at risk. It was Lily's life. And that was something Dominic wasn't prepared to lose. He walked over to his desk, his hands gripping the edge. His thoughts were consumed with one thing: Lily. He couldn't let the Volkovs get to her. He wouldn't. He had already lost too much in his life, too many people who had betrayed him or fallen away. But Lily was different. She wasn't like the others. She had stood by him when no one else would, and now, he would do whatever it took to protect her. He couldn't let her become a pawn in someone else's game. As he reached for his phone, his mind flickered back to the moment they had shared just a few days ago, when everything had seemed so simple, when he had felt for the first time in years that he could trust someone. He couldn't afford to lose that. He couldn't afford to lose her. "We'll be ready." Marco's voice interrupted his thoughts. Dominic looked up, meeting Marco's gaze. "Get her to the safe house," Dominic ordered. "Now." Marco nodded again, understanding the urgency in Dominic's tone. As the team moved out, Dominic stood still for a moment, his mind sharp with focus. He was the Mafia boss, the one everyone feared, the one who controlled everything. But right now, that didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was Lily. He couldn't let the Volkovs take her. He couldn't let them win. As he stepped into the elevator, his phone buzzed with another update. The Volkovs were already moving, already closing in on Lily. Dominic's pulse quickened. The countdown had begun. There was no time to waste. He had to act now, or it would be too late. When the doors of the elevator opened, Dominic stepped into the hallway, his mind focused, his body ready for whatever came next. He was prepared to fight for everything he had built, but more importantly, he was ready to fight for her. For Lily. He wasn't going to lose her. Not now. Not ever. Dominic sat in the back of his black SUV, his jaw clenched, his thoughts racing. Everything was unfolding faster than he had anticipated. The Volkovs had made their move, and now, Lily was in danger. His team had moved quickly, securing the safe house. but he knew it wouldn't be long before the Volkovs found a way to track her down. Dominic had spent years building an empire based on power, secrecy, and intimidation. But now, for the first time, he felt powerless. Lily wasn't part of his world. She wasn't trained to deal with the kind of danger that came with being involved with him. And yet, here she was, caught in the crossfire of a war he had never wanted her to be a part of. The car screeched to a stop in front of the safe house, and Dominic's heart raced as he stepped out, his mind focused on one thing: keeping Lily safe. Marco was already at the door, his face grim. "She's inside, but we need to move fast," Marco said, his voice tense. Dominic nodded, his expression hardening. He didn't need to be told twice. They moved quickly, entering the house through the back entrance. The atmosphere was tense, but Dominic didn't allow himself to show it. His focus was solely on Lily. She was the only thing that mattered now. When they reached the living room, Dominic saw her standing near the window, her back to him. She hadn't heard him enter. Her hair was loose, her shoulders tense as she stared out into the darkened street. She was trying to act brave, but Dominic could see the fear in her posture, in the way her hands gripped the edge of the curtain. She turned around when she heard the sound of his footsteps. For a moment, there was silence between them. She looked at him, her eyes wide, full of uncertainty. "What's going on, Dominic?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic could see the vulnerability in her eyes. The woman who had once been so strong, so independent, was now shaken. And it was his fault. He had brought this danger into her life. He had let her get too close. And now, he couldn't protect her from it. He took a deep breath, stepping closer to her. "The Volkovs know where you are," he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We don't have much time. They're coming." Lily's face paled, and for a moment, she looked like she might faint. But she steadied herself, her eyes locking onto his. "I didn't ask for this, Dominic," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't ask to be dragged into your world." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had never meant for any of this to happen. He had kept his world separate, had tried to protect her from the dangers that lurked just beyond the surface. But now, he could see the reality of it all. He couldn't protect her from everything. "I know," Dominic said, his voice softening. "But you're in it now, and I'm not going to let them hurt you." Lily took a step back, her hands shaking. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice cracking. "You don't get how dangerous this is. How dangerous you are." Dominic's heart sank. He had always known his life was filled with danger, but hearing it from her, the one person he had let his guard down with, stung. He couldn't deny the truth in her words. His world was dangerous, and it was dangerous for her too. But he couldn't change that. He couldn't undo what had already been set in motion. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I never wanted to bring this into your life," he said, his voice sincere. "But now that it's here, I'll protect you. I'll do whatever it takes." Lily didn't pull away, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She was scared. She didn't know who to trust. And maybe, for the first time, Dominic wasn't sure if she could trust him. But he wasn't going to give up. Not without a fight. "We need to go," Dominic said, his voice filled with authority. "They'll be here soon." He didn't give her a chance to respond before he led her out of the room and into the waiting car. His security team was already in position, their weapons ready. The stakes had never been higher. Dominic's mind was racing, planning the next move. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about power, about money, or about his empire. He was thinking about her, about keeping her safe. And he would do whatever it took to make sure nothing happened to her. The car sped down the street, the sound of the tires cutting through the night like a sharp knife. Dominic glanced at Lily, who sat quietly next to him, her face pale and set in determination. He could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else there too, something that made him believe that maybe, just maybe, they could get through this. Together, they were about to face a storm, and he didn't know how it would end. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let her face it alone. The safe house was quiet, too quiet. Dominic paced the floor, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, each one more urgent than the last. Lily sat in the corner of the room, her back pressed against the wall, her arms crossed over her chest. She was trying to remain calm, trying to keep her composure, but Dominic could see the tension in her body, the way her eyes darted around the room. She was scared, and so was he. The Volkovs were coming, and every moment they spent here brought them one step closer to danger. Dominic had never been this on edge, even when he had been on the front lines of the city's most dangerous deals. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. And in the end, that was what made it so much more dangerous. He turned to Marco, who was standing by the door, his eyes scanning the outside world through a small window. Marco had been his right hand for years, but even he looked nervous now. "How much time do we have?" Dominic asked, his voice low, barely above a whisper. Marco turned to face him, his expression grim. "Not much," he replied. "They're getting closer. We need to move, now." Dominic nodded, his mind already working through the best course of action. He knew the Volkovs would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. They were ruthless, calculated, and they had too many resources at their disposal. But what they didn't have was the one thing Dominic had: determination, and a willingness to protect the people he cared about. "Lily," Dominic said, his voice softer now, "we need to get you out of here. It's too dangerous." Lily looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. She had always been strong, independent, but now, in this moment, she seemed vulnerable. She was scared, and Dominic knew that part of her wanted to argue, wanted to fight this on her own. But deep down, she knew she couldn't. Not without him. "I'm not leaving you," Lily said quietly, standing up from her spot. "I'm not running anymore." Dominic felt a jolt of emotion run through him at her words. She was right. She wasn't going to run. And neither was he. He wasn't going to let the Volkovs take her from him, no matter the cost. He walked over to her, his steps slow and deliberate, and placed his hand on her shoulder. "We'll face this together," he said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere, either." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them heavy with unspoken understanding. The world outside was crashing down, but in this room, in this moment, they were together. And that was all that mattered. But just as they were about to move, a loud crash echoed through the front door. Dominic's heart skipped a beat. The Volkovs had arrived. He turned to Marco, his voice cold. "Get ready. We're not going down without a fight." The security team sprang into action, grabbing their weapons and positioning themselves at the ready. Dominic turned to Lily, his eyes softening for a moment. "Stay close," he said. "I'll protect you." Lily nodded, her face resolute. There was no time for hesitation now. The door burst open, and a group of armed men rushed in, their faces masked, their movements swift and precise. The Volkovs weren't wasting any time. They had come to take what they believed was theirs. But Dominic wasn't about to let that happen. He moved quickly, taking the first man down with a swift strike, his mind focused, his body reacting with practiced precision. The others in the room followed suit, the gunshots ringing out as the battle unfolded around them. Dominic could hear Lily's breath quickening, could feel the heat of her presence behind him as she stayed close. He knew she was scared, but she was strong, stronger than he had ever given her credit for. The fight raged on, the room filled with chaos, but Dominic kept his eyes on Lily. She was his priority now. She was all that mattered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of the Volkov men fell to the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Dominic stood, his chest heaving, his mind still racing, but he didn't take his eyes off Lily. She was safe. For now. He walked over to her, his hand reaching for hers. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. Lily looked up at him, her face pale but determined. "I'm fine," she said softly, squeezing his hand. "But we need to go. This isn't over." Dominic nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. The Volkovs had made their move, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Dominic knew that, but he also knew something else. He wasn't going to let them have her, not without a fight. And this time, he would fight to the end. He turned to Marco, his voice steady. "Get the cars ready. We're moving out." Marco nodded, and within moments, they were on their way out the door, heading toward the next chapter of their fight. Dominic didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to lose her. The night was thick with tension as Dominic and Lily made their way through the underground garage. The sounds of their footsteps echoed in the hollow space, drowned out by the rush of thoughts in Dominic's mind. Lily walked close beside him, her eyes scanning the shadows, her hand gripped tightly in his. It was clear that they both understood what came next. There was no turning back now. The Volkovs were still out there, lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike again. They wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But Dominic wasn't about to let them win. Not now. Not after everything. They reached the black SUV, its sleek, armored body glinting under the harsh garage lights. Dominic opened the door for Lily, his gaze flickering toward the exit as he stepped in behind her. Marco was already in the driver's seat, his eyes flicking nervously between the rearview mirror and the dark road ahead. "We need to move quickly," Marco said, his voice sharp with urgency. "They're not far behind." Dominic nodded, his jaw tightening. Every second counted now. He could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had fought his entire life to build his empire, but now, for the first time, he realized what truly mattered: keeping Lily safe. As the car sped through the dark streets, the night air cool against the windows, Dominic couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The city, which had always felt like home, now felt like a trap. Every turn, every corner, seemed to be closing in on them. "Where are we going?" Lily's voice broke. Through his thoughts, her tone calm but tinged with worry. Dominic turned his gaze to her, his expression unreadable. "We're heading to one of my properties outside the city. It's safer there," he said, his voice steady. Lily didn't respond right away. She was quiet for a moment, her gaze focused on the passing streetlights as they flickered by. "You didn't have to bring me into this, Dominic," she said, her voice softer now. "You could have let me walk away. I never asked for any of this." Dominic felt a pang of guilt twist in his chest. He hadn't wanted this for her. He hadn't wanted her to be dragged into his dangerous world. But now, there was no turning back. He could see the hurt in her eyes, the confusion, and the fear. "I know," he said quietly, "but I couldn't let you go. Not after everything." She looked at him then, her eyes searching his face. "I don't know what's worse, Dominic. The fact that you brought me into this world, or the fact that I'm still here, still standing by your side." Dominic didn't have an answer. The truth was, he didn't know why he had brought her into this. He hadn't planned on it. But in a way, he couldn't imagine a life without her now. She was the only person who had ever seen him for who he truly was, and still stayed. And now, he would protect her, no matter the cost. The car took a sharp turn, heading toward the outskirts of the city. The road grew emptier, the lights dimmer, as they left the familiar behind. Dominic's eyes scanned the rearview mirror once again, his mind racing with the next steps. They had to get to the safe house. They had to lay low until they could figure out how to deal with the Volkovs. But even as he planned, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. "Are you okay?" Dominic asked, his voice softening as he turned to Lily. She looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, before she nodded. "I'm just trying to process everything," she said, her voice tight. "This whole thing, it's a lot to take in." Dominic felt a pang of empathy. He knew exactly what she meant. The life she had known, the one she had fought to build, was slipping away from her in a way she couldn't control. But she was stronger than she realized. Stronger than anyone he had ever known. "We'll get through this," Dominic said firmly, his eyes meeting hers. "We'll make sure you're safe, and we'll deal with the Volkovs. No matter what it takes." There was a long pause as they drove through the darkened streets, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the occasional click of the tires against the pavement. Then, finally, Lily spoke again. "What if it's too late? What if they're already planning their next move?" Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Then we make our move first," Dominic replied, his voice calm but unwavering. "We strike before they have a chance to get to you. We don't wait for them to come after us. We take control." The words felt like a promise, a vow that he would do whatever it took to protect her. And Lily knew he meant it. There was something in his eyes, something that told her he wasn't just protecting his empire anymore. He was protecting her. As the car pulled into the long driveway of the property, a sense of relief washed over Dominic. They were safe, for now. But he knew the peace wouldn't last. The Volkovs would come. They always came. But this time, they would face something different. This time, they would face Dominic Castellano, and he wouldn't let them win. The morning after their arrival at the safe house, Dominic woke up with a sense of urgency gnawing at his gut. The faint sound of birds outside the window did little to calm his racing mind. It had been only a few hours since they arrived, but the reality of the situation had begun to settle in. The Volkovs were still out there, and now they knew where to find him. He had barely slept. his thoughts consumed with how to deal with this escalating threat. He walked over to the window, his eyes scanning the still, quiet landscape outside. The safe house, located in a secluded area just outside the city, was surrounded by dense woods. It was a good place to lay low, to regroup. But Dominic knew the Volkovs wouldn't take long to catch up. And when they did, there would be no turning back. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Lily. Standing in the doorway, her face pale but resolute. She looked different this morning. The fear that had gripped her the night before was still there, but there was something else in her eyes now. Strength. Determination. She had seen what the Volkovs were capable of, and yet, she was standing there, ready to face whatever came next. Dominic's heart clenched at the sight of her. She had stepped into his world without hesitation, even though she knew the dangers. And now, there was no turning back for her either. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. Lily didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but with a hint of worry. "What now, Dominic?" He met her gaze, his mind working quickly. "Now, we wait," he said, though the words felt hollow. "We wait for the Volkovs to make their move, and then we strike first." He could see the uncertainty flicker in her eyes. She wasn't used to this world, wasn't used to living with the constant threat of danger hanging over her. But she was starting to understand, starting to accept that this was the reality they were now living in. Dominic could see that she was still processing everything. But he also knew something else. She wasn't afraid to fight. She wasn't afraid to stand beside him, even in the face of danger. "I'm not going to let them hurt you," he added, his voice firm. Lily nodded, though she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Dominic could see the trust in her eyes. The trust he had been craving from everyone for so long. And for the first time in years, it felt like he wasn't alone. They were in this together. But the question still lingered in his mind. How long would they have to wait before the Volkovs made their move? And when they did, would they be ready? He couldn't afford to waste any more time. Every second counted now. The Volkovs wouldn't hesitate to strike, and Dominic wasn't going to let them take anything from him, least of all Lily. As the day passed, Dominic's mind remained on high alert. He knew that the Volkovs would be planning something. They were always calculating, always waiting for the right moment to make their move. He couldn't predict exactly when they would strike, but he could feel it coming. The tension in the air was thick, and every small sound, every creak of the floorboards, every shift of wind outside, made his heart race. Lily, however, seemed to have a different energy. She had settled into the rhythm of the house, moving around with a calm efficiency. It was almost as if she was used to living in hiding, as if she had lived a life in the shadows before. Dominic watched her, unable to ignore the way she had adapted so quickly. There was a strength in her that he hadn't fully understood before. She wasn't just a victim in all of this. She was a survivor, and that made Dominic feel more determined than ever to protect her. But there was still a part of him that was conflicted. He had always been the one in control. He had always been the one making the decisions. But now, with Lily by his side, things were different. He had to trust her. He had to let her be a part of this, even if it meant letting go of the control he had held onto for so long. And that thought was both terrifying and liberating. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Dominic gathered his team together in the living room. Marco was there, along with a few of the other men who had helped secure the house. They were preparing for whatever came next. Dominic's mind was sharp as he laid out the plan. They couldn't afford to take chances. "We need to move fast," he said, his voice commanding. "Once they make their move, we need to be ready to strike. They won't expect us to go after them first. That's our advantage." Marco nodded, his expression serious. "Understood, boss." Dominic turned to look at Lily, who had been standing quietly in the corner, listening to the conversation. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, he saw the fear return. But it was different now. It wasn't the kind of fear that made her want to run. It was the kind of fear that made her want to fight. "You're not alone in this," Dominic said to her softly, his voice reassuring. She nodded, a faint smile crossing her lips. And in that moment, Dominic knew they would face whatever came next together. The Volkovs were coming, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. But Dominic was ready. Ready to fight. Ready to protect the woman who had stolen his heart and who, in turn, had shown him that even in the darkest of times, there was still light. The night was darker than usual as Dominic and Lily sat in the quiet of the safe house. The tension between them had shifted. It was no longer just about survival. It was about trust. It was about the storm that was inevitably coming their way. Dominic sat in the armchair, his hands resting on his knees, staring into the darkness outside the window. His mind raced through possible scenarios, trying to prepare for what was to come. The Volkovs were on their way. It wasn't just the threat of violence. It was the fear of losing everything he had built, everything he had worked for, and the one person he had allowed himself to care for. Lily. She was sitting across from him, her arms wrapped around her legs as she stared at the floor. She had been quiet all night, absorbed in her own thoughts, no doubt processing the chaos of the past few days. Dominic couldn't help but feel responsible for everything that had happened to her. She hadn't signed up for any of this. She hadn't asked for her life to be upended by his world of danger. He had brought this on her, and for that, he couldn't forgive himself. But there was no time for regret now. Only action. He stood up suddenly, breaking the silence. Lily looked up at him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "We need to get ready," he said, his voice low and firm. "The Volkovs will be here soon, and we can't afford to wait." Lily didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. She stood up and walked over to him, her steps hesitant but determined. "I'm with you," she said quietly. Dominic didn't answer immediately. He just nodded, the weight of her words settling in. She was with him. Even now, when everything was falling apart, she stood by his side. It made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But the hope was fleeting. There was no time to dwell on it. The Volkovs were coming, and they had to be ready. Dominic turned toward Marco, who was standing in the corner, his eyes sharp, his face unreadable. "Is everything set?" Dominic asked. Marco nodded. "We've secured the perimeter. The team is in position. We're ready." Dominic's mind clicked into gear. There were no more distractions. The fight was coming, and he had to make sure they were prepared. He walked over to the table where a map of the surrounding area was laid out, pointing to various exits and defensive positions. "If they come from the east, we'll use the alley to the back. The rest of the team will stay in place until we're ready." He looked over at Marco, who was already scanning the room, ensuring everything was in order. "What about Lily?" Marco asked, his voice low. Dominic's gaze shifted to her. She was standing by the door, her back straight, her eyes focused, despite the fear that he knew she was hiding. She was trying to stay strong, trying to keep it together, but he could see through the cracks. "She stays close to us," Dominic replied, his voice steady. "She'll be safe with us." Marco didn't argue. He just nodded, the weight of the situation settling between them. The team moved swiftly, preparing for whatever the Volkovs had planned. Dominic turned back to Lily. She was still standing near the door, her arms crossed. "Are you sure you want to stay?" he asked, his voice softer this time. Lily met his gaze. There was no hesitation in her eyes. "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. "I'll stay with you." It wasn't just a promise. It was a statement of trust. A statement that she had made her choice, and that choice was to stay by his side, even in the face of the unknown. Dominic's chest tightened. He didn't deserve her trust. He didn't deserve the loyalty she was giving him. But in that moment, he knew that he wasn't going to let her down. He couldn't. He reached out to her, his hand brushing her arm lightly. "Stay close," he said, his voice steady. She nodded, stepping closer to him. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they waited. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the anticipation of what was to come. Then, the sound of tires screeching on the gravel outside broke the stillness. Dominic's body went rigid, his mind sharpening. "They're here," Marco said, his voice low. Dominic's heart pounded in his chest, but there was no fear. Not now. The Volkovs were on their way, but this time, they wouldn't catch him off guard. This time, Dominic was ready. The door slammed open, and a group of armed men stormed in, their footsteps heavy and quick. The Volkovs had arrived, just as Dominic had expected. But they weren't going to get what they wanted. Not without a fight. Dominic moved with precision, his body reacting instinctively. The first man fell with a thud, his weapon clattering to the floor. The rest of the team followed suit, taking down the Volkov men with ruthless efficiency. But as the gunfire rang out, Dominic's focus never wavered. He kept his eyes on Lily, his body positioning itself between her and the threat. She was his priority now. Always. The fight seemed to stretch on forever, but eventually, the room fell silent. The Volkovs had been defeated. For now, Dominic stood, breathing heavily, his body covered in sweat, but his gaze never left Lily. She was safe. For now. But as he looked around the room, he knew this was only the beginning. The Volkovs would regroup. They would come for him again. And next time, they wouldn't be so easy to defeat. The aftermath of the fight felt surreal. The safe house, once a quiet sanctuary, now felt like a war zone. The floor was littered with the bodies of the Volkov men, their blood staining the cold concrete. Dominic stood among them, breathing heavily, his body stiff with tension. His mind was still processing what had just happened. He had expected a fight, but not like this. Not so close, not so personal. He had never been one to let anyone get too close, but Lily had changed that. And now, she was caught in the middle of his dangerous world. As he glanced over to her, he saw her standing near the window, her face pale but determined. She was shaken, no doubt, but she was still standing, still holding on. That alone made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: pride. She was stronger than anyone he had known, stronger than he had given her credit for. She had survived the chaos, and she wasn't running away. "You all right?" Dominic asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. Lily turned to him, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady, though he could hear the faintest tremor beneath the calm exterior. She took a step forward, her gaze never leaving his. "But you can't keep protecting me like this. This world, it's too much for me. I can't keep hiding behind you." Dominic's heart sank. He had known this moment would come, but hearing her say it out loud still hit him harder than he expected. He had always been the protector, always been the one to carry the weight of everything. But Lily wasn't the kind of woman who would stand idly by. She wanted to be involved. She wanted to be strong. "I know," he said quietly, his eyes softening as he took a step closer to her. "But this world, it's dangerous, Lily. It's not just the Volkovs. There are others, people who would use you against me, against us." He paused, trying to find the right words. "I'm not trying to keep you safe by keeping you in the dark. I can't lose you." The words felt foreign on his tongue, but they were true. He had spent so many years hiding his emotions, burying them beneath layers of power and fear. But now, with Lily, he couldn't hide anymore. "I'm not asking you to fight for me," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I need you to understand why I have to do what I do. It's not just about us. It's about keeping you safe. It's about keeping everyone I care about safe." Lily's eyes softened as she took a step forward, closing the distance between them. For a moment, they just stood there, the tension of the fight fading into the background. She reached up, her hand gently resting on his arm. "I understand," she said, her voice firm but kind. "But I'm not just some person you protect from the shadows. I'm not weak. I want to be by your side. I want to help. We're in this together, Dominic. And I won't stand by while you carry the burden on your own." Dominic's breath caught in his chest. He had never expected this, never expected her to say those words. But in that moment, something inside him shifted. She was right. They were in this together. And he wasn't alone anymore. "I don't want to put you in danger," he said softly. "I won't risk losing you." She smiled, a small but genuine smile, one that lit up her eyes and softened her features. "You won't lose me," she said. "I'm right here." Dominic felt a weight lift from his chest, though the danger was far from over. They still had the Volkovs to deal with, still had to face the aftermath of the attack. But in that moment, as he looked into Lily's eyes, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to face this world alone. They were a team now, and together, they would find a way to survive. The door to the safe house creaked open, interrupting their quiet moment. Marco entered, his face grim but relieved. "Boss, we need to move," he said quickly, his tone urgent. "The Volkovs are regrouping. We don't have much time." Dominic nodded, his eyes never leaving Lily's. "We'll be ready," he said firmly. He turned to Marco, his mind snapping back into action. "Prepare the cars. We're not staying here." Marco hesitated for a moment, sensing the shift in Dominic's demeanor. There was something different in him now, something that spoke of a man no longer alone in his fight. "Understood," Marco said, and turned to leave. Dominic took a deep breath and turned back to Lily. We don't have much time, he said. But whatever happens, we're facing this together. She nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. Together, she repeated. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Dominic felt a sense of peace settle over him. The fight wasn't over, but they would fight it as a team. They would fight it as equals. The escape was swift, but there was no relief. Every second that passed felt like a lifetime, and as they drove through the night, Dominic could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The Volkovs were relentless. They wouldn't stop. He had known that from the moment they crossed paths, but this time, it was different. This time, they had Lily. She was sitting beside him in the back of the car, her hand gripping his tightly, her body tense but resolute. The city lights blurred outside the windows, but Dominic didn't notice them. His focus was entirely on her. He had promised to keep her safe, and no matter what, he wasn't going to break that promise. As the car sped through the streets, Dominic glanced over at Lily. She was calm, but he could see the slight tremor in her fingers. She wasn't used to this life, and yet, here she was, standing beside him, fighting through the fear. The trust in her eyes was unmistakable. She wasn't just a victim in this. She was a partner, and that made all the difference. He squeezed her hand, his voice steady despite the chaos inside his mind. We're almost there. Stay close, all right. Lily nodded, but her expression was hard to read. You're not going to let them win, are you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's heart tightened. He had never been one to show vulnerability, but with her, he couldn't help it. She had seen him for who he truly was, flaws and all, and still, she chose to stay by his side. That alone made him want to fight harder. No, he replied, his voice low but firm. I'm not going to let them win. Not while you're with me. The car finally turned down a narrow street, slowing as it approached an unassuming building at the end. This was their final stop, the place where they would make their stand. The plan was simple. Secure the building, wait for the Volkovs to make their move, and then strike first. But even with a plan in place, Dominic felt the unease gnawing at him. The Volkovs wouldn't come in force, not all at once. They would be patient, methodical. They would want to draw him out, see if they could provoke him into making a mistake. But Dominic wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. He had already lost too much. He wasn't going to lose Lily, too. The car pulled to a stop, and Marco was the first to step out, surveying the area with his usual sharp gaze. Dominic followed, his hand still firmly gripping Lily's as they moved toward the building. The team had already secured the perimeter, and all that was left to do now was wait. But even as they entered the building, Dominic couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The silence in the air felt suffocating, every footstep echoing as they moved through the corridors. It wasn't the same kind of silence he was used to, the kind that came from waiting for something dangerous to happen. This was different. This was the silence before a storm. They reached the back room, the one where they would set up and wait. Dominic motioned for Lily to take a seat, but she hesitated. Are you sure about this? She asked, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. He looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of his words. No, he admitted. But we don't have a choice. She nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She didn't need him to say anything more. As they settled in, the tension in the room was palpable. Time seemed to drag on, every minute feeling like an eternity. Dominic kept his eyes trained on the door, waiting for any sign of movement, any hint that the Volkovs were closing in. But there was nothing. The minutes stretched, and his patience began to fray. He knew the Volkovs weren't stupid. They were waiting, just as he was. But what were they waiting for? As the night wore on, Dominic felt the shift in the air, the sense that something was coming, something big. And when it finally happened, it came from a direction he hadn't expected. A loud crash echoed from the hallway, followed by the sound of boots stomping on the floor. Dominic's instincts kicked in. Get ready, he said, his voice sharp. The team quickly sprang into action, moving into position as the door burst open. But it wasn't the Volkovs who entered. It was someone else. Someone Dominic had hoped he'd never see again. Well, the voice came, low and dangerous. Looks like we have ourselves a little reunion. Dominic's blood ran cold as he turned to face the man standing in the doorway. His past had just caught up with him, and he wasn't going to escape it this time. Experience the intense emotions and unforgettable connections found in romance stories that transcend the typical narrative. A mafia boss and a courageous woman are forced to confront their fears and desires as they navigate a dangerous world of betrayal, power, and unexpected love. In these romance stories, trust and loyalty are tested as the characters fight to survive and protect each other from dangerous forces closing in. The chemistry between the protagonists develops amidst the constant tension of the mafia world, where every decision could mean life or death. As the stakes rise, so does the emotional depth of their relationship, making these romance stories unforgettable. With every twist and turn, these characters push their limits, revealing the strength of their bond. The tension and suspense, mixed with powerful moments of connection, make this journey through danger and love one that will captivate any fan of thrilling romance stories. If you're looking for gripping tales of passion, loyalty, and survival, these romance stories will leave you on the edge of your seat, craving more. Don't miss the chance to dive into a world where love and danger collide, and only the strongest bonds can survive.